So I personally love Seton Hall. I would have loved my kids to have come here, but they wanted the away experience. So one of them graduated from Providence and is now in grad school at Columbia University, and the other two are still at Providence. One ready to graduate. He's decided he wants to do medicine, and the other one wants to do not-for-profit business, and she's a sophomore there. But they have a very, very interesting story that's woven into the lives of the saints, and I think you'll find that interesting. I lecture a lot. I'm a professor of pediatrics at Columbia University, and I teach a lot of residents and fellows and interns, and mostly what I talk about is medicine. Except for Father Brian's invitation, I really never talk about religion, unless it's just things that people come up and ask me. So this is kind of very informal and uncomfortable in the sense that I'm much more relaxed talking about like renal perfusion and those kind of things. Also, I know as a professor, it can get very boring. So if you walk out, I won't be offended. But the truth is, I think if I was going to study anything but medicine, it probably would have been hagiography, because I have found the saints fascinating for as long as I can ever remember. I know it dates back to first grade because my parents have told me that. And that, I think, was just God's grace. I mean, how many 6-year-olds are really very interested in the saints in detail? And that was me. My story with the saints started, we grew up in Flushing, Queens, and our parish school was St. Andrew Avellino on Northern Boulevard in Flushing, Queens. And in those days, they had a lot of religious arts stores. You could go in and buy statues and sacramentals, and it was a great time, I think, in the church. And this little shop was very quaint and right across the street from my parish school. So I remember in first grade, we had just gotten our report card, and if you did well, you got like $1. Now, of course, I guess you'd need $20. But I went into this store, and I just fell in love with St. Therese. And for those who don't know her, whoops, this is her. She's a Carmelite. She is really kind of a saint of the modern times. You'll hear a lot of people talk to her. They know her as the Little Flower. She's famous for what we call the Little Way, which is really the way of childlike confidence in the Father. And I found her so attractive that I wanted to read about her. And I've followed her story ever since. So that's when I first met her. So at confirmation, it was logical I would take her name. And being a child, you believe anything could happen, right? We say nothing's impossible for God, but children really believe it. Adults tend to doubt it and be mistrustful of it. So I go in and I say in the back of the church of St. Andrew's, if I'm supposed to take your name and you're supposed to shower your friend with roses, well, show me a sign so that I know that's the name. And sure enough, I go back after school. I used to go in for visits very often after class, and there was a perfect pink rose in front of her statue, right on the floor. So I went home and I said to my mother, yep, it's going to be Therese. So she said, how do you know? I said, because she sent me the rose. I asked, and she sent it. So my mother said, where'd you get this thing? Because there were no rose bushes near my home, trust me. And I said, she sent it to me, I asked, and here it is. And ever since, she and I have had this really amazing connection. And through my life, I'll show you different ways that came out. So anyway, I grew up. I had a very regular childhood. We moved to Long Island in high school, and I was a volunteer in a hospital and decided I'd want to be a nurse. So I went to St. Vincent's School of Nursing in New York City right after high school. And I very quickly actually became a head nurse in pediatrics and decided that's just something was missing. I think I was a very good nurse. I loved it, but just something was missing. I really wanted to make diagnoses. And that's a little bit of a different role than what a nurse does. So I decided, well, maybe I'll do medicine. And what happened along the way, I got very ill, and I was diagnosed with an early bladder cancer, and found myself at age 21 in NYU looking out over the East River. Beautiful sun was shining, and around me were all older male patients with renal cancer and bladder cancer, because it's unusual for a woman to have bladder cancer. And this was very, very early. So I had to have surgery, and I thought, how can God be doing this to me? What's this all about? And there was a gentleman sitting there, and he said, listen, read this, I think it'll help you. And it was the passage by St. Paul that basically said, I was given a thorn in my flesh, for it's when I am weak that I am strong. And that just hit me so hard. And I thought, wow, this is it. In weakness, in powerlessness, there is power. It's all what you do with it. So St. Paul and I got a connection there. So now it wasn't just about St. Therese, now it's also about St. Paul. Well, anyway, what winds up happening is I go back, I get a degree in biology and chemistry, and I had a very, very high cum. And as is many the story, in those early days, women weren't really welcome in medicine. If you were a woman, you didn't really go to medical school. It was very, very difficult, and so I didn't get in, although I only applied to 5 Ivy League places. That didn't help, of course. But I thought, I'm a nurse, I have all of these cums, all of these degrees, all of this experience, it's gonna be a no-brainer. And that was that. So now what do you do? Well, doctors I were working with were from the Philippines, and they said, listen, don't stop. You're a natural at medicine. Go apply to Far Eastern University, which is in the heart of Manila. Now, you have to understand that I never left home. But when I say never left home, I mean never went out of the state. Like, New Jersey was far from me then. And here I am getting on a plane to go to the Philippines. Okay, so in my second year of medical school, I one day notice I'm developing a rash, and I wound up with dengue hemorrhagic fever, and wound up in an intensive care unit in Makati Medical Center, almost dead. There was a very famous guy there, Dr. Limson, who was my specialist, and he came in and he said, you're a very bad case. I'm gonna have to try you on some experimental medicine, but without it, you're not going to make it. So I called up my parents, and I said, listen, this isn't good. And they're like, come back to the United States, we'll send you to the best places. I said, actually, the best place is here. This is the world's expert that's taking care of me. Nobody in the States is gonna know what to do. So I can tell you that my fever was so high, and my platelet count, which helps your blood clot, was so low that I actually cried tears of blood. I didn't believe that could happen, but it did. They were pink, and they were pouring down my face. I was bleeding out of my rectum, out of my mouth, and I thought, boy, oh boy. Even though I hadn't finished medical school, I knew enough from nursing that people don't survive this. So I thought, God, this is some kind of sick joke. You bring me here, and now I'm dying. So I said, you gotta pull me out. This is the truth. At 4 o'clock in the morning, out under the door shoots a novena card of St. Rita. Now, St. Rita, for those of you who don't see her, she's pictured holding a cross with a thorn in her head. It's a thorn stigmata. I had never heard of her. Now, I know a lot of Italian people know St. Anthony and St. Rita, but we were Irish Catholics, and I knew nothing about St. Rita. So I'm thinking to myself, it's a 9-day novena, I probably have 12 hours left to live, but let me start praying, because I don't have anything left, right? Well, the following morning, they come in, my fever broke, bleeding in my rectum and gums stopped, and it looked like I was starting to improve. Now, of course, they're going to tell you it's the medicine. But we know a lot about that medication, knowing it fails frequently. Why would I believe it was the medication? I am convinced that it was St. Rita. So I made a little deal with her. You know, you always make these deals when you're desperate, and then when you're well, you forget them, right? So I was like, listen, if you can get me out of here, okay, because I have no money left, I have to take my parasitology boards, and if you could get me out of here, I'll tell everyone about you. Well, of course, I did survive. I graduated. I came back, never forgot her, but she was on the back burner. Until one day, I am in my office at Columbia University, and this is years later, and I'm cleaning my office full of dust, full of books, and imagine this was the day when we had phone books, okay? So I'm dating myself. The phone book falls down from the top shelf, and when I pick it up, it's open, and in bold print, it says, National Shrine of St. Rita, South Bronx. So I'm like, the National Shrine of St. Rita? And I'm thinking, oh, this is an omen. This is not good. This is not good. I've had a really successful career, and I forgot who helped me get there. Not good. Never forget your roots. So I decide I'm going on an expedition to the South Bronx. Now, Columbia is on the west side up at like 168th Street near the Hudson, and this is in the heart of the South Bronx, round the block from where Mother Teresa actually started her first convent in the US. So I go there expecting to see a cathedral, right? This is the National Shrine. So I pull up and I think this has to be the wrong address because it looks like a factory painted pale blue on concrete blocks with a wooden door that looks like it's been kicked in. So I think, I can't, but it says in hand paint, National Shrine of Rita. Well, of course, I get there after call. Now, I had been up for 36 hours at this point. I wasn't in the mood for a joke. I'm like, where's the church? Where's St. Rita? And I can't get in the gates. But there's a rectory right next door, and there's a light hanging that looks like a Psycho light from a Psycho movie, and you go to ring the bell, except the buzzer is hanging out disconnected. So now, with trepidation, I push the door open, and what do I see but hanging the picture of my parish in the Philippines, hanging right there. And next to it, St. Therese. So I say, well, they may murder me here, but I think I'm meant to be here. And you know, frankly, when you're post-call, let them murder me. I'll die a martyr, and I won't have to grieve going back to work tomorrow exhausted. So I proceed down the hall, and I'm like, hello, anyone here? And Father Jose, a lovely Augustinian, comes out and says, can I help you? So I said, look, this sounds nuts, right? I'm a doctor at Columbia. I'm post-call. That's why I'm in these scrubs. I look like a mess. And I'm here because I owe St. Rita a favor. And it's many years overdue because I almost died of dengue in the Philippines, and I'm here to pay my debt. So he says, tell me more. I said, well, you know, I was dying. Dr. Limson, you know, was trying everything, and then this novena comes under the door of St. Rita, and anyway, so I bought her statue, but then I never did anything about it. He said, I was the priest that put it under your door. He was assigned exactly at that church, at that hospital, in that year, to put those novenas under the door of the sickest patients. I'm like, wow. So anyway, now I add another saint to the works, right? Okay. Now, mind you, through the experience at the Philippines, and you can look all of this up, you know, now with internet, everything I'm telling you, you can check. I lived through a grenade blast. I lived through what they call the Malati Massacre, where the neighbors above me through a Chinese mafia connection, were all murdered. I came home from school, blood's pouring down the staircase. They were all murdered, stepping over bodies. I pulled people out of barbed wire fences. A guy was going to Saudi Arabia with a grenade on his belt and threw it into the apartment complex I was living in, and everybody blew up. You should see what it's like to pull skin and people and their hair, and everybody blown out through this grenade blast, stuck in barbed wire fences. The interesting part is I was supposed to take a trauma final that day for surgery, and I literally missed the final. I came in, I was covered in blood. You know, doctors there as medical students had to wear white uniforms that button down like the old, you know, Dr. Kildare movies. I was covered in blood. And the guy said, "Oh, come on, tell me another story. You're getting 0 for the final." I'm like, "We were doing trauma." So myself and the other American were going to get a 0. Now, you know, it was 50% of your grade. That's a problem. And let me tell you, I was coming back to New York no matter what. So thank God the class president had photographed it all, of us diving in and pulling everybody out. So through that whole process of wondering through the trial, what are they going to do with us? Are they going to graduate us or aren't they? I came across the diary of the early Christian martyrs. If you have never read the story of Saints Perpetua and Felicity, I strongly recommend you do it. It will move you to tears. You will not forget it, that these 2 women, one who had just given birth to a premature baby in the jail, were then put for heifers, wild heifers, in the arena at the Colosseum to be eaten, and then eventually were beheaded. But they hung them in nets so that the milk from the lactating mom would actually attract the wild heifers. This is how sick the early Romans were. And yet they never denounced Christ. Think about that. Like, would you be willing to do that? Like, I think always to myself, you know, I'm talking about the saints, but if someone came here and said, "Hey, Marin, how would you like to, you know, go in a lion's pit tonight for Christ?" I'd be terrified, right? You know, you'd say, maybe shoot me, but lions, I don't know about that. You know, wild heifers, I think not. So you have to think, what were these people like? Okay, so now I come home from the Philippines, definitely older, wiser, and definitely battered. And I'm getting headaches. So of course, at first you'd think, it's the adjustment, time zone, blah, blah, blah. Except they were early morning headaches. Now, anyone that knows something about brain tumors knows early morning headaches are never good, okay? Because oftentimes it signifies that there's a mass in there, that there's a tumor. And sure enough, there was. Now, that can't be taken out because it lays right behind where the optic discs cross that can blind you. But pituitary adenomas, while they're benign, you're on medication for life, and you can't usually get pregnant. So that was kind of a bummer. And I have to say, at the time, I was engaged. But when that individual found out about it, what do you think happened? The engagement was broken. So all of the plans down the tubes, and it was a shocker because I had known this person for 4 years. I thought he was a very good person. And now suddenly, well, you know, he's not going to commit to something like that. Okay, so you move on and you say, well, you know, this is a tough one. And I remember going to a church at the time. I was a resident at St. Vincent's in New York City, which went bankrupt and closed. But I went there and they always had a very, very large, you know, from like ceiling to floor crucifix. And at the bottom was a prayer called the Prayer of Abandonment. And while he's not a saint, he's a venerable. He's a brother that started an order of Nazareth, and his name is Charles de Foucauld. He was someone that went out into the Sahara to try and befriend Muslim brothers. So he's very, very timely for what's going on today. And I have to tell you, it's my favorite prayer. I have some of the cards in my pocketbook if anyone's so inclined, but essentially, the prayer of abandonment summarizes everything the saints have taught me, and I say it every day, and it got me through that experience. So now I accept that I can't have kids. And what winds up happening is a guy that I had gone to medical school with, that was my buddy, he meets me and he says, you know, I can't meet a decent girl. This is a problem. He said, you know, they all want to date you because you're a doctor and they think you're going to be rich, but they don't like you for you. I said, you're telling me? Try and be a woman and be a doctor. I said, they don't want to go near you. They think you're just a nerd, you're not fun, you're always post-call, forget it. So anyway, he said, well, you know, we could always date. And I'm like, oh, forget it. You know, you're my friend. Like, this isn't going to work. Well, anyway, you know, this is being taped, so I won't tell you the rest of the story. But anyway, we wound up getting engaged. And 4 years later, I find out I'm pregnant. Oh my gosh, this is a miracle. This is a miracle because, frankly, he was an OB resident, and I was a neonatology fellow at Columbia because, you know, the way it works, you do 4 years of medical school, then you do 3 years of pediatric residency, and then you do 3 years of neonatology fellowship if you want to do intensive care for babies. So at this time, I'm in my first year of that fellowship. So he's so busy being an obstetrician, and I'm so busy like trying to survive the fellowship at Columbia. So it's kind of like, who's really thinking about, you know, that we don't have kids? Should we adopt? Shouldn't we adopt? I was like trying to stay awake. And we often laugh, our marriage has lasted 28 years because it's like ships passing in the night. House call, how's your hospital? How's your hospital? So we never fight because we're always busy with patients. So what winds up happening is I deliver Matthew, and we named him Matthew because it means a gift from God. And we were so excited. I mean, the nursery was ready. Everything was ready. And what happens is Matthew gets stuck, and they can't get Matthew out. But every C-section room was being used. So I tell them, listen, he's losing his heart rate. Just cut me open on the bed. Just cut me open on the bed. We cannot lose this baby. Well, what happens is Matthew comes out with great difficulty and is in a complete cardiopulmonary arrest. Now, I think the worst nightmare for a fellow is to know you have to resuscitate your attending's kid. And that's what happened. They come in and they're like, oh, and they go out. I said, no, please do exactly what you've been trained to do and forget that it's my child. So Matthew had epinephrine in his heart, chest compressions, intubation, respirator. And at that point, people see the blood gases, which are consistent with a dead child. Now, what do? Do you remove the respirator? And I'll tell you something. Until you're in that situation, you honestly don't know how you're going to feel. As a doctor and a scientist, you say, yeah, this kid's done for. But as a mother, you look at this child who was so handsome. Matthew is really strikingly handsome, I have to tell you, and charming. And, you know, doesn't date anybody, just telling you. Can't find a girl, he's so old-fashioned. So anyway, whatever. That's good. My son, he can stay home with me. So they're like, listen, you know, do you want to remove the respirator? So I come in, and of course, I'd been talking to Matthew the whole 9 months. So I go over and I said, Matthew, I said, how can you do this to your mother? And he opens one eye. And I was like, you know what? He hears me. It's fine. And they're like, Dr. Marin, you know it's not fine. Like, look at this blood work. Look at his respirator. And I'm like, if all he ever does is open one eye, I can deal with it. So Matthew, I prayed to St. Therese like I've never prayed in my life. I prayed day and night while he was in the ICU. And at one point, right before Palm Sunday, ironically, he was born on April Fool's Day. Are you kidding me? Like the story of my life, okay? I go to the closest church to my house, which was Our Lady of Sorrows. And there's, if you've ever been in that church right here in South Orange, when you go in, to the extreme left, there is a large wooden statue of St. Therese. So help me God, I go in to pray for Matthew. And what's there but a huge spray of pale blue roses. And what does it say? There's a card, in honor of Matthew. I was like, this is it. Whatever it's going to be, it's going to be. Matthew graduated with honors from Providence College in psychology and is now a graduate student with an almost perfect cum at Columbia University and wants to be a clinical psychologist for the underprivileged. So that's the story of Matthew. That's the story of Therese and Matthew. Okay, so now we're focusing on Matthew. He had a little attention deficit disorder, was speech delayed, we're doing all this stuff. And what happens? Lo and behold, I get pregnant with Timothy. Now, here's the problem. And this is where the pro-life part comes in. I was resuscitating a kid. It was very interesting. I was doing research on placentas at Columbia. And you have to get all these placentas and culture them and everything. So I'm in the back washroom of the labor room, and they call and they say, we need an attending stat. The fellows can't get this kid intubated. And I go in, and this kid's this big, and he's truly dead, and they can't find the vocal cords, which can happen. I mean, these things are minute. So I pick up stuff. I don't have gloves because I'm thinking, oh my God, we're already way behind in the time for this kid's brain to be oxygenated. So I pick up the stuff, I intubate the kid, and later on, I come by to see how the baby's doing. This was on Valentine's Day. And the residents say, it's weird, like the kid's platelet count won't pick up. So I said, sometimes you have that with cytomegalovirus. So send a culture. And they put my name on as the attending, even though I was on the research month. Well, what happens is I get a call later that day. Now, at this point, I was 8 weeks pregnant or 9 weeks pregnant. They call and they say, oh my God, Dr. Marin, thank God we got you. Don't let any pregnant attending near this kid. He's loaded with cytomegalovirus. I'm like, you're kidding me. I am pregnant. And it's the earliest embryologic development, the worst time to get hit with this virus. Well, of course, you know what everyone says. Oh, you're not going to catch it, though. You're not going to catch it. I'm like, oh, believe me, I'll catch it. Okay. And then they tell me, which, is what every pediatrician would tell you. Oh, you've been working with kids your whole life. Of course you have some kind of immune titer. So I said, well, you know what? I'm in the brain tumor study. They owe me. I'm going to call and say, give me some of the blood back so I can test my immune titer. No, I wasn't immune. I had a 0 titer. You know what the odds of that are? That's like really bad luck. So my temperature goes up to 104, and then starts the studies, the famous studies. They start sending blood levels and titers and PCRs and amniocentesis. And, when you get caught up in this, it's like they're like, come on, we got to look at the brain, we got to look, blah, blah. And you're like, yeah, right, you have to do that. And you're just kind of disconnected, going with the flow. So the conclusion was that Timothy would be deaf, blind, and retarded. So you're going to have to abort, right? Isn't that what everybody's going to do? I mean, you have a vegetable. Like, why put the child through this? Now, I have to tell you, and please listen to what I'm saying about this, because I'm sure some of you, deep in your heart, are judgmental. I know I was. I used to hear people getting abortions all the time in nursing and medicine, and I used to think, all those people, like, they're Catholic? Like, how could they even think about this? Well, let me tell you, I was pretty much a daily communicant. I said the rosary, I said the stations. I think I was a good person. And I found myself thinking about an abortion. Seriously thinking about it. And do you know why? You know, everyone always thinks it's the woman's selfish. Let me tell you, did you ever think of what it's like to be a mother and have a child that will just lay there for the rest of their life, and then after you leave the earth, who cares for that kid? Is he going to be abused? Is he going to be molested? How's Matthew going to help him? Matthew's running around with ADD. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how are we going to get through this? Isn't it just safer for him to be with God? That's what I was honestly thinking. I never thought about how it was going to affect my life. It was all about what's going to happen with Timothy. So we call Timothy Timothy because it means in honor of the presence of God. And I have to say, I prayed to Therese, I prayed to Perpetua and Felicity, I prayed to Rita, I prayed to every saint I ever knew. And along the way, you develop a peace where you say, I think I can do this. And the day Timothy was born, I'm telling you, I was terrorized to even see, because a lot of times you can tell just by looking at the kids. And he looked gorgeous. He looked like his brother. And I'm like, oh my God, well, you know, he may be deaf, blind, and retarded, but he's good looking. You know, I could work with that. You know, maybe we won't tell the girl. So anyway, what actually turned me away from the abortion? This is a miracle. And this is where one of my very favorite saints of all time comes in, which is Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta. I had met her. I was very active in the Missionaries of Charity, but not the active branch, actually, the contemplatives. I've taken care of them, and I'm very dear friends with a number of them. And they had given me a book of Mother a couple of years before. And, you know, like everything in my house, you know, you have kids running around and medical books and periodicals and relatives sleeping over and all this stuff. I had put it up in a closet where I keep wrapping paper. And what's funny is if you ever put anything in that closet, you will never find it again. And I'm thinking the whole weekend, like, you know, if this is what I'm supposed to do, have an abortion, why, like, does this feel so not right then? And this is constantly going in my head like a ping pong ball back and forth. I'm gonna, or I can't. Why am I thinking this? I have to. I have no choice. And this is what goes through your head. And this book falls out of the top shelf of the wrapping paper closet in the hallway. And what does it fall open to? Mother Teresa's quote, "It is a great poverty that a child should die so that you may live as you wish." And I said, boy, oh boy. So this isn't what I wanted. And as Saint Therese always said, and this is true, and it's a great mantra, I've used it many times in my life, I have decided to choose what I have not chosen. I have decided to choose what I have not chosen. It's a simple way of saying abandonment. You didn't want it, it's not what you would have picked, but I'm going to take it into myself and do the best I can and offer that to God. That's what abandonment really comes down to. So Timothy will be graduating from Providence, summa cum laude. He wears glasses, but he is not blind, he is not deaf, he's 6'1", he is very healthy, he is a brilliant chess player, he loves sports, and he's a computer whiz. We thought he was going to actually do a PhD in computer science, and he's decided he wants to do medicine. So that's the kid that was going to be blind, deaf, and retarded. Now, that was enough for me. I hear people are pregnant, I want to send a sympathy card. So, at age 42, I find out I am pregnant, and it's Catherine. So, people said to me, oh, were you trying for the girl? No, actually, I wasn't trying at all. So, anyway, I'm so excited. And then comes the horror, where I get a call one day. It was the most beautiful March. It was a cold, crisp day. And I'm sitting reading a book quietly while the boys are asleep. It's a Saturday. And the phone rings. And it's Dorothy Warburton from Columbia's genetic lab. And she said, Mary, congratulations, you're going to have a daughter. And I'm like, a daughter? Wow. I thought it would be a boy. She said, but there's a problem. It's going to be Down syndrome. Down syndrome, wow. Real shocker. Hits you like someone punched you in the gut. You're so weak, you don't know if you can stand up. Maybe you'll throw up. Maybe you'll just go to bed and pull a blanket over your head and forget it all. That's how it feels. And long story short, it helped that I had been through this before with the boys. So once again, I made a huge appeal to Therese. And the day I actually delivered, there was a petal of rose petals from the parking lot all the way in to where I actually delivered her. Now, if you've ever been to Colombia, let me tell you, you don't find rose petals anywhere. People don't even send them flowers, okay? Most of the patients are poor from the Dominican Republic, and you don't see these kind of things. And I kind of had a sense that she was with me and it would be okay. And sure enough, Catherine did not have Down syndrome. She's the president of like everything you could be the president of. She's a Spitfire. And she's a real pro-life advocate because clearly she sees that without that, where would Matthew, Timothy, and she be? Now, I'll tell you one other quick story because I know that I'm running out of time, God knows. But there is a very interesting story. In the course of St. Vincent's, I had established a hospice center so that women that wanted to have children that were handicapped would be able to come and experience the birth of the child and have a hospice setting. And one of these women came from Connecticut with a baby boy with trisomy 18. And she said, Dr. Marin, I think I'm going to have an abortion, but I'm coming here to see what you have to say about this. And I said, listen, let us help you. Don't be afraid of this. Most of this comes from fear. This abortion thing is driven by fear. I'm telling you this. So anyway, she said, maybe you could pray. I see you have all of these saints that you love. Maybe you could pray to them that I could deliver him long enough for him to be baptized. Do you think you could do that for me? I said, absolutely. I will make that my mission. Well, right after I spoke on EWTN, I started hemorrhaging very badly, and I had to go in for an emergency hysterectomy. And anyway, thank God, they thought maybe it would be ovarian cancer. It was not. So I had my ovaries removed, my fallopian tubes, my uterus. I was very sick. And during the course of things, I felt very, very, very strongly that I was in labor. Now, I have to tell you, I've had 3 kids. I know what labor feels like. And this was not your standard post-op pain. This was truly felt in every way like labor. And this went on through the night, and I thought, I wonder if this person is delivering this baby somewhere else tonight. And the concept that St. Therese spoke about is the concept of the victim soul, where you can be so united to someone in their grief and suffering that you become intimately a part of that suffering and can offer your suffering for that. Well, anyway, on the Feast of Our Lady of Lourdes, this went on until 9:20 in the morning, where it just stopped. No pain medication, pain went away, never came back. And 2 hours later, I get a phone call from this mother. And she said, Dr. Marin, I heard you were in the hospital, and I would normally never bother you, but I have to tell you, the wish came true. I said, the wish? She said, I was in labor yesterday, all through the night, and I never felt a thing. She said, and he was born, and he was alive in my arms long enough for them to baptize him, and then he expired. I said, Liz, I know what time he expired. He died at 9:20 in the morning. She said, how would you know that? I said, I just know. So, in closing, there's so many other stories. You'll have to take my word for it. But I summed up a couple of points because, every college student needs bullet points, right? But I promise you won't get a test. What I have learned from the saints: 1, abandonment to God's will. Decide to choose what you have not chosen. 2, God is found in the ordinary. The big mistake is people waiting for that extreme moment where he reveals himself. Everything you're doing, whether it's fighting with a doormate or doing your laundry or standing on too long a line in the cafeteria, God is in the ordinary. Pray to discern what your vocation is. Take time to actually pray about that. Whether it's motherhood, whether it's the priesthood, whether it's religious life, whether it's being a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, a business person, whatever it is. And do it with humility and zeal. There's nothing worse than people that are pompous jerks. God knows we see enough of that, and I'll leave that alone. Secondly, one thing Therese taught, and Charles de Foucauld also alludes to this in his literature. Everyone thinks of martyrdom as bloody, right? You get thrown to the wolves. But nobody thinks of white martyrdom. White martyrdom is so difficult because no one sees it. No one sees your pain. I have lupus. Nobody knows. Well, now I guess they all know. But it's funny. When you have cancer, everyone feels sorry for you. When you have lupus, a pituitary, now it's like, hey, get to work. Okay? There is a white martyrdom that is equally painful and a lot longer than I often tell my residents, do me a favor, just throw me to the lions. It's easier than dealing with some of you people. Something I learned from a young age from my parents is that the Blessed Mother brings you to her Son. You'll notice I didn't mention Mary or Joseph because they're in a league all their own. It's a given it starts with them. Joseph is the curveball saint. When life throws you a curveball, look to Joseph. You don't hear him complaining. You don't hear him talking. You don't hear him questioning. You think he made an excuse for Mary's pregnancy? No. He just stepped up to the bait and he sucked it up, right? That's what he did. Great curveball saint. And the Blessed Mother, what can you ever say? She's Queen of Martyrs. Saints are highly specific. I strongly suggest you pick one. Pick one and research them and keep a sacramental around, whether it's a medal, a statue, whatever, because they're your advocate. They're your go-to guys. These are my go-to guys. As a Benedictine oblate, I can tell you that we're taught ora and labora, a great recipe for college students. Ora and labora, prayer and work. You gotta keep it in balance. If you're praying all the time and you're not doing any good work, you're fooling yourself. And likewise, if you say, oh, my work's a prayer, I don't have to, are you kidding me? That would mean I never pray, I'm always working. No, you have to stop. I have a little prayer chair corner in my bedroom where I sit, and that's where I do my readings, my scripture readings, my rosary, that little quiet space, wherever it is, put a little chair there. and put some sacramentals. You gotta have a crucifix. I hope every dorm has a crucifix. If they don't, I'm assigning you to put one up. Because you know what? You have to look at it. It makes a difference. You know, we have stop signs. Why? To remind you gotta stop. Although sometimes, I do have to tell you, and the New Jersey police will know, I've been accused of roadkill because at 2 a.m. when they call me stat for delivery, raccoons don't seem as important as human life, so they go up in the air and almost through the sunroof of my Honda. Okay? There's tons of books on prayer. They're great. I've read a lot of them. It still comes down to talking to God like a friend. Don't keep reading the books on how to pray. Then you're not praying. You're just always reading about it, right? The Jesuits, the 3 C's, great for college students. No competing, no comparing, and no complaining. The 3 C's. Sometimes courage is remaining silent. Think about that one. Trust despite the circumstances. And as Mother Teresa said, give until it hurts with a smile. So on that, and one of my very, very favorite Marian feasts is the Annunciation, because think about it, Annunciations come into your life all the time. The question is, what are you going to do with it when they come?